So all morning we're hearing about threats and the threats that you should worry about and how you can counter some of those threats, especially the ones that people carry in. Your own staff carry in your BYOD strategy. We heard about how one company is helping to protect hundreds of online sites and how to deal with compliance constraints that matter to you if you operate anywhere in Europe, in large parts of Asia, or North America. But it's all about threats and how to counter those threats. But how do you find out what threats are there? How do you find out who is attacking other banks if you're a bank, other manufacturers if you're a manufacturer, other government agencies if you're a government agency? So our next speaker, who is with a bank, Saul, will be talking about sharing how you share threats and how you find out what threats you should worry about now because other organizations are having to deal with those threats. So I'd like to introduce David Saul from State Street Bank.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Roberto and all of you for inviting me here today to talk about one aspect of cybersecurity, and it's something that we all can do, whatever industry sector we happen to be in, to protect ourselves and to protect our customers. Now, one question you may ask, says I'm the chief scientist, is what qualifies me to talk about cybersecurity? I served 2 terms as State Street's Chief Information Security Officer for a total of over 6 years. And through a combination of some of the practices that I'm going to talk about and a certain amount of luck, we managed to avoid any significant cybersecurity incidents during that period of time. Now, not all of you may be familiar with State Street as a company and what we do for our business. State Street is in the business of providing data services for asset managers. So pension funds, insurance companies, investment managers, mutual funds, any institution that's serving pooled data assets and requires a bank to be the ultimate custodian of that for record keeping, accounting purposes, reporting uses. And as of our last annual report, June of 2012, as an investment manager, State Street had about $2 trillion, that's trillion with a T, dollars in assets under management, and we were also acting as custodian for well over $20 trillion. So we certainly have a lot of size and we have a lot of client assets to protect. Let me run through for you what the agenda is that I'm going to cover. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the current threat environment and how those threats are increasing in size and sophistication. You've already heard a lot about that this morning, so this is a good follow-on to that. I'm going to talk about State Street as an individual company, and now that you know what business we're in, which is primarily a data business, and it's very, very important for us to protect that data for our clients. But you may see some examples that apply to whatever particular industry sector you're in, whether you're a bank yourself, you're a government, you're in retailing, media, whatever. The nature of the threats and the things that you do about them are important. Talk about some of the places where we get information about current threats and how they change in order to prepare ourselves. A multi-layered security model, so there isn't one solution that deals with every size of problem, so we need to have multiple solutions for multiple problems. And then I'll get into two specific examples. I'll talk about an industry-associated organization where we share threat information with other financial services companies. And then I'll also talk about a regional model that cuts across multiple industries where we have built an organization, a volunteer organization among ourselves at the regional level. And I'll expand on that a little bit to talk about the top 5 priorities that organization sees in protecting information security assets. And again, you may be able to identify with those top 5 or at least some portion of them. And then at the end, I'd like to leave some time for questions. But before I begin and talk about information security, let me make an analogy here with why collaboration, why working in partnership with others is important to deal with information security risks. Think about your house and how you protect the physical assets in your house and your family from various kinds of threats. You wouldn't be satisfied just having a fence around your property. That you would want to have that, but that alone would not be sufficient. You'd also want to have locks on the door. In addition to that, you probably want to have an alarm system. And you'd want that alarm system not just to be local, but to be connected to some form of law enforcement. And even with all of those things, if you now had a neighborhood association where your neighbors were looking at your house, and if they saw something that was going on your property that didn't look right, and they would notify you, and similarly, if you saw something, you would notify them. That's an additional level of protection. So when I talk about partnerships and collaborations, it's very much like adding that additional layer of protection. Doesn't replace any of the other ones, but it gives you a higher degree of security. You've heard a lot this morning about the kinds of threats that we all have to deal with. Some of those threats come from organized crime, who are trying to steal financial assets. In some cases, they come from competitors who are trying to steal our knowledge, our intellectual property. We have groups that are just interested in disrupting our operations because they might have a particular cause, and this gives them publicity for their cause. We have nation states who have very, very well organized mechanisms, and you heard a bit earlier about the Advanced Persistent Threat, which is very, very well financed. And there's no lack of examples. You can't pick up the newspaper on a daily basis without hearing about some well-known company, and companies that you would think have the highest degree of protection. RSA, a company that's in the business of selling security services, they were breached 2 years ago in a significant way. Companies that have consumer-facing products. Sony has been breached multiple times. Social networking environments. LinkedIn, a little over a year ago, had a major breach of its password mechanisms, which allowed people to break into it. There are multiple examples of financial institutions, credit card processing. Just this morning, before I came here, I read the news back home in Massachusetts, where I live and work, and there was a front page article of a Massachusetts-based company that was in the business of building wind turbines as an alternative energy source. And they had some inventions that make their wind turbines more efficient than the competition, so giving them an advantage in the market. And they discovered that their inventions, their intellectual property, had been stolen by a nation state. So none of us are immune from this. So we need all the help we can get. One of the things that we use as an outside source of information is Verizon, which is a vendor that a lot of us are familiar with for providing telephone services or internet connectivity services. Verizon is also in the business of providing security services, and one thing they do is publish on an annual basis. The latest one came out a little over a month ago. This is freely available. They don't charge for it, so anyone can look for the Verizon Data Breach Report. And this is a global report sourced from many different organizations, Verizon being the primary source since they provide a backbone for the internet globally on data breaches that have occurred, reported data breaches. Now, not all data breaches are reported. In some cases, if a company discovers this, if it's not required by a local regulation, they really don't want the publicity that their data has been hacked into. But this is a substantially accurate report. And then they break it down. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can see that different attackers are looking for different kinds of things. So organized crime is looking to steal financial assets. Some of the state-affiliated, nation-state threats are trying to find inventions or intellectual property, and while they're doing it, not be discovered. The activists are disruptive, and they want to be discovered. They want the publicity. But as a company, there are several things that drive our entire information security program. And first and foremost is what is important to our clients. So we're selling services to our clients that are fundamentally based on being able to trust that we will protect their data. So first and foremost is the concerns of our clients. One kind of attack that started in the third quarter of last year was one of those activist groups. And they claimed their motivation was that in the United States there were on social media various videos and other material that was not respectful of Islam. It turns out, and we have definitive evidence from multiple sources, that this group was really a front for the government of Iran. And the government of Iran felt justified in providing the resources in order to do that because of the boycott of its financial system. So to retaliate for the financial pain that Iran was feeling, they're disrupting the financial operations of institutions in the United States. And this is a distributed denial of service attack. Very simply, they send so much traffic from false sites to your valid website that your real customers can't get in. So someone a bank, someone wants to go in, check their balance, do a transfer, pay a bill, discover it looks like the site is not available, and so you're not only losing business, but it impacts your reputation. The advanced persistent threats, you heard Greg earlier this morning. These are very, very well financed, in a lot of cases by governments, or more and more frequently we're seeing these from terrorist organizations. And they're very, very difficult to find because by their nature they want to be hidden, and they're also very, very difficult to root out. Another thing that we see in the attacker community is they're very good at sharing information among themselves. So if one attack group comes up with a new technique, a new mechanism, a new piece of software to get to their ends, they share it with others via social networking. So one of the other reasons why we think collaboration is important is if the bad guys are doing it, then we think the good guys ought to be able to do it as well. Insider threats, and if you go back to the Verizon report, that's actually less of an issue than external threats. The latest Verizon report stated that 9 out of 10 of these attacks came about from some external source. Doesn't mean you shouldn't worry about the internal threats as well. And internal, I extend that to include not just your employees, but also to the people that you contract with. You might be outsourcing some services. And don't forget your vendors. In any case where you might be storing data at a vendor site, it's very important to make sure that you validate that that vendor is practicing the same safe security practices that you are. So make sure that that's included in your envelope. Social engineering, this is almost all of the successful attacks started not with someone who was breaching automated security, but they started with a human being making an error of judgment. So the most common of these is someone receives an email, and the email may be of a business nature, it may be of a social nature, it may pretend to be from a government agency that's requiring you to report on something. It may be someone who you think you know, who's sending you a joke by email or sending you an interesting photograph that you should take a look at. And without thinking, the individual goes to the link in that email, clicks on the link, and that's the start of the attack. And they don't realize it, and they may see the photograph of what they think is someone's vacation and how they're really enjoying themselves. Well, at the same time, that end site has installed malicious software or malware on their computer. And that malicious software or that malware from an attacker may do nothing right away. It may sit there for weeks. It may sit there for months. We even have instances where it sits and lies in wait for years. The most important thing that you can do in any organization is to educate your employees, to make them aware that if they receive an email or they're visiting a social networking site and they are not 100% confident that they can trust where that's coming from, they know who the individual is, do not click on anything in that email. The best thing would be to report it to your internal security organization, but at a minimum, they should just delete it. Because remember, these people are sharing information. So if you click on that link, be assured that the attacker now knows that, and they're going to share that information with another attacker to say, you've now found a soft spot in the organization. About a year ago, we had, and by the way, the attackers are constantly innovating. About a year ago, they came up with a new scheme, and it's not just sending you the email, because a lot of companies are getting very good about training their employees. We actually require our employees annually to go through a training program. We test them at the end about not clicking on emails. This latest attack is called a watering hole attack. And it draws on the example, if you go into the African jungle and you're a predator, you're a lion, and you're looking for an antelope to have for dinner that night, a very good place to go is to go to the local watering hole, because the antelope is going to go there, is going to be vulnerable, and you, the lion, are now going to have a meal. So what a watering hole attack is, they don't send you an email directly. They go to a site, they guess a site that you may go to on a regular basis. It might be a media site. You might be going to read the latest day's news. So what the attackers will do, they'll find one of these sites that doesn't have a robust security program, and they'll install malware on that external site. So now you think you're going in and you're reading the latest news, and you are, but at the same time, that watering hole site is now infecting your system. The other piece of this is, particularly in the advanced persistent threat, there are entire organizations that once this malware is installed, they sit external to your organization, and they now use those sites to do things inside your company without your being aware of it. And these are called command and control sites. And in one example, there was a photograph several months ago that was in, I know it was in Time magazine in the United States. I don't know how widespread it was globally. And this was a photograph of an office building in Shanghai, China. And this office building is entirely manned by people whose job, this is their entire job, is to come in on a daily basis. They log in and they go and monitor systems that have been compromised globally. And the reason you know that is you can see traffic that you have not generated coming from these infected systems back to the command and control site. And they're really businesses, because you can see what time they come in the morning, when they take a break for lunch, and when they leave at night. And it's clearly something that they see a benefit for information theft. And then you've heard a lot about compliance and regulation. I don't mean to minimize the importance of this, and the real reason to do it is to maintain your business. But if for no other reason, the regulatory agencies are going to come in and they're going to check that you're doing this, that you're in compliance with the laws, with the regulations, and that's true of any geography in which you operate. So where do we as State Street get sources of information about current threats and get them very quickly? And we use a combination of private and public sources, because not everyone has all of the information. There isn't one place that you can go. So there are private organizations like iDefense, which is subsidiary of VeriSign, a security business that provides daily bulletin information on what's happening across a variety of industries. Two of them I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, the FSISAT and the ACSC, which are the national and the regional threat sharing organizations. IBM, and in our case, we outsource some of our network management to IBM as a vendor. So IBM does this for a number of companies, and we buy a service from them. The Verizon data breach report I already mentioned, that's free. Verizon also provides, and we contract for a number of security services from Verizon. In particular, the distributed denial of service attack is very visible. It's not an attack where they're trying to hide. They're trying to disrupt your business. And the best way to deal with a distributed denial of service attack is to never let it get inside your company, is to work with the communications vendor, whether that's Verizon, AT&T, British Telecom, whoever it happens to be, and they actually have services where they will detect an increase in traffic, an abnormal increase in traffic, and will block it before it ever gets to you. And then there are a whole variety of law enforcement agencies in the United States. The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of the Treasury are the two major federal agencies that provide us with information about threats, as well as the FBI, the Secret Service, U.S. Cyber Command. I didn't list them all. I think the last time I looked there were 17 different federal agencies. So one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later on is information overload and being able to sift through the information to find out what's important to your company and what's not. This slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but if you came away with one realization from this morning, it's that this is a complex problem. And it's a problem that doesn't lend itself to a simple solution. The solution itself is going to be complex. So what this slide represents is State Street's model, and a lot of other companies have come up with a layered security model. And one way to think about this picture is think of it as an onion. And so an onion has multiple layers. If you peel off the outer skin of an onion, you come down to the next layer and the next layer. At the center of this, and in our case, are the most important critical data assets that we're protecting for ourselves and for our customers. So these are the financial transactions. This is where we store the data about what trades our customers have made on the various exchanges. This is where we store the information about what their asset positions are. So this is the most important and the piece that we need to protect the most. As you work your way out through the various layers of the onion, eventually you get to the outer area, which might be information that we put on our public website that's just for publicity purposes. And while we don't want anybody corrupting it, it's not going to cause any financial loss. And the various layers in between and the mechanisms that you see up there are used to protect all of those. All right, so let's talk about collaboration at the federal level. And this is an organization that goes back over 10 years. It was the result of a presidential directive that was issued back in 1999 in the United States of America that dictated that a variety of industries were part of the critical infrastructure of the operation of the country. So an example would be the electrical utilities that delivered electrical services are part of the critical infrastructure. Other utilities like water and gas. Financial services, so keeping the financial system going, was deemed to be critical infrastructure, and an organization called the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or FSISAC for short, was set up for us to share information on threats, share information on best practices, and the various interdependencies that we had among that organization. This has been very, very effective. In particular, going back to the example that I talked about, the distributed denial of service attacks, when one of the institutions within the FSISAC sees one of these attacks, almost immediately the rest of us are notified, and we are on alert because typically they don't attack just a single institution. They'll go after 2 or 3 or maybe even 6, and it's not always the same at the same time. So having that advanced warning from someone who's in the same industry is very, very valuable to us. The other thing that we share is information about what we're doing to prevent these distributed denial of service attacks as well as other kinds of attacks. So within financial services, we have this. About 4 years ago, several of us in our geography, in the northeastern part of the United States, while we saw the value in the industry-specific piece, we believed that in some cases, best practices that were taking place in one industry could be transferred over to another industry, and there wasn't really a good way for us to transfer those. And so we got together without any government direction, really on a volunteer basis, with several industries. In our case, people who were in the defense industry, financial services, healthcare, utilities, and put together this group called the Advanced Cybersecurity Center, or ACSC. And this was based on the belief that in order to really cooperate and collaborate, we needed to bring together three different parties. We wanted to bring together industry, both people who were users, like our case, as well as providers of security services. So, for example, RSA being a member of this. We wanted to bring together government because government serves a dual role here. They're both a user in that they store a lot of data about all of us and they process it, and they need to protect that. They also serve in that regulatory capacity. And then the third part of the triangle is to leverage universities. And universities are a source of research, so we could take some of these problems that we had that could create a technical solution and have universities use their research aspect to look at these problems, come up with solutions, and in some cases turn those solutions over to industrial providers so the industry is serving its purpose and industry providers are now creating new products and services. The other part that we wanted in universities is have universities train their students to be practitioners in information security. So our future employees, we wanted our future employees to be more knowledgeable, to be more aware, to come into our organization. So by bringing all three of these together in the cooperative arrangement, we felt that the sum total was going to be greater than any of the three parts could do on their own. And the ACSC, it's a nonprofit. It exists. It's a corporation. It exists, and we're all members of it. The membership at this point is around 30 institutions that cut across all three of those areas that I described. And there are three major purposes that we have. The first is information sharing. And information sharing, think about this. If you had information about a threat, how would you know that you could trust that information? That it came from a trusted source and you could take action on it, versus it might be an attacker who was trying to masquerade as someone else and in fact was trying to entrap you. By having a small regional organization, the people know each other. They have a personal relationship. Every other Tuesday, we have people from our organizations get together physically and share what they've seen over the prior 2 weeks. What are the indications that they've seen? What kind of threats have they blocked? What do they look like? And they know that they can trust one another because they have this direct working relationship. Now we're looking to build on that direct person-to-person relationship, providing some automated tools that others can use as well. The second aspect of this I've already touched on is the research and development. So we're sponsoring research projects at the universities. We've created internships where students at the universities can, in addition to their coursework, can come work in our company and get practical experience as to what does a threat really look like as opposed to just a classroom exercise. At the same time, while they're working for us as interns, we get a chance to evaluate them as potentially future hires into our company. And then the third piece of it is we want to take all of this information, all of this experience, and the collective weight, the fact that we represent significant revenue to our region, to go to our government, to the government regulators, to go to the legislators, to go to the executive branch of the government and say, here's what we want you to do from a policy point of view. Next time you write a regulation, think about the regulation in the context of those of us who actually have to execute it. Don't write it in isolation and make our job harder. We want you to make our job easier, and we want you to protect us. So I'm briefly going to go through a few more slides here, and then I do want to leave time for questions. We at the ACSC we break down the strategy. So if you think of those three things in terms of threat sharing, research at the universities, and policy into short, medium, and long term. So we map onto that. Some of these things will have immediate deliverables. So for example, in the short term, on the threat sharing is the fact that we have every other Tuesday where people get together, share threat information. On the long term, we have initiated some work to develop software that will enable us to automate that so people don't have to physically come together, but yet they know that they can trust the information. And we've come up with 5 priorities. The first of these is we want to influence the people who are building software. So whether this is hardware, where people are building computers or network devices, software where they're building operating systems or databases or applications or everything in between, that the software that's being built by its very nature is going to be more resilient and more difficult for attackers to penetrate. So the harder that is, the easier it makes our job. The second priority, and it's already been touched on, David touched on it this morning, think about all of these sensors that are gathering information from all over the place. So it's not just internally from every one of our systems where we're gathering information and putting it into log files, but we actually have sensors globally that are looking externally and seeing attacks before they ever get to us, or the vendors who are protecting us against denial of service attacks are sending us information. This is a lot of information. It's too much information to have somebody sit in front of a computer screen and decide, well, this is good and this is bad. So by applying some of the technologies of big data, what you're really looking for is something out of the ordinary. So you might have a transactional system, and this transactional system is located in London, in the United Kingdom. And on a daily basis, it transfers 100 million pounds. And you notice that on this one day, the transaction doesn't originate from London, or maybe it doesn't originate from the office in London, but it now originates from Russia. And instead of 100 million pounds, it's £1 billion. You don't want to wait until your business controls catch this transaction later on in the cycle. You want to detect this right away as an anomaly, and at a minimum, you want to put it off into a queue where a human being is going to look at it and say, yes, this is a valid transaction. The United Kingdom company is doing a merger and acquisition in Russia, and it really is a valid transaction. Or no, it's an organized crime syndicate, and they're just trying to steal £1 billion. Again, very good setup for my presentation. You heard from Luis this morning about how mobility is making this more and more complicated, because now that transaction that might have taken place from somebody's office in London in the United Kingdom could be taking place from their mobile device while they're traveling somewhere else. And is it a valid transaction or not? And then the last two of these are one of the things that makes all of this much more difficult is we used to have time to deal with these. The time between when an attack started and we were able to recognize it, we had time to put defenses in place. More and more, we're seeing those time frames shrink. And so we need to be if the attack is taking place closer and closer to real time, we need to be able to have responses that are not after the fact, that are more and more taking place in real time. And then the last one is this isn't just about technology. This isn't just about people. You really need to have an overall governance structure, management structure for the way in which this is integrated into your business. It can't be something that sits off on the side that you don't think about in the overall context of doing business. So in this case, we're working with some of our local business schools and schools of management to develop techniques for measurements for risk and security that we can use in a business context, not just with technology people. And my last slide, and again, I'm talking about State Street, the business that we're in, protecting data assets. So this first bullet up here, you should substitute the name of your organization or your institution. The important thing is that you need to have a plan. It needs to be a plan that's based on what your industry is, what assets you're trying to protect, whether they're hard or soft assets, what risks you're trying to protect against, who the attackers are, who's trying to steal assets from you, what form those attacks would take place. So if you don't have that and you can't go back and point to it, and it isn't spread widely throughout your company so that not just the information technology people know about it, but everyone in the business knows about it, then I would make that my number one priority when I get back to the office on Monday morning. The second is there's no single solution. So that's the bad news. The good news is that there are multiple sources of help, both internal to your organization, externally, at the government level, at a cooperative level. You've already heard about a number of vendors, and you'll hear after I'm done about other vendors who are glad to sell you services in the security space. In our case, for State Street, we rely in particular on a national organization which is vertical within the financial services industry, so it has very specific knowledge about the types of business we do, the types of transactions, and those risks. But we also use a horizontal model where we're able to learn from the defense industry. We're able to learn from the healthcare industry, from utilities, from consultants, and in particular, working with universities who always bring a very broad perspective to any problem they deal with. And then the last point is you can't stay still. So you can have the best plan in the world. If that plan is not able to evolve, is not able to change as the threats change, then you're very quickly going to fall behind. So on balance, I really want to leave you with there are a number of solutions to these problems, but the worst mistake that anyone can make is inattention, is believing that it can't happen to your organization. We have a saying in information security that there are two types of organizations, two types of companies. One is companies that have had a breach of some kind, they know about that breach, they're aware of it. And the second is companies that have been breached and don't know about it. Okay. So you're in one of those two categories, and I'm not going to ask people to raise their hands if you know you're in the first category. But if you think someone has not been probing your organization, has not been looking for assets to steal, then you really are missing a very great risk to your organization. So that's the end of my prepared remarks, and I think we have Roberto has a microphone, and I'd be glad to take questions. Well, I mean, I can ask questions to the audience too, right? That's
No, we found, I'm sure we all did, we found this ACSC concept very interesting. Would you mind telling us a little bit of how it's organized, how it's funded, and how it operates?
Excellent question. I should have done that. The founding members, when we got together, realized that we looked at other similar organizations that had previously done this in the technology space, but we worried immediately about sharing information across companies that might be competitors. We were concerned on the legal side about that. We were also concerned about antitrust and any laws that might be there. So we put together a group of lawyers from several of the companies and representing suppliers, users, government, universities. And going into it, it looked like an unsolvable problem, because at one end of the spectrum we had defense companies like MITRE, which services the U.S. government, only the U.S. government, and primarily the Department of Defense. So they had classified information at one end of the spectrum. And then we had universities at the other, and as you know, universities want openness. They want to be able to publish. And in the middle, we had companies like ourselves, where we're very, very protective of the information that we store about our customers. We had companies who saw that new inventions might come out of this, and they might want to be able to make products from it. Companies like RSA. We were able to structure an agreement that all of those companies were able to sign, and it was by finding a balance between that. So The good news with information security threats is that if you look at a specific threat, you are able to take off the information from that might identify the company that's being attacked or the specific piece of software. So take some of those details away, and you still have enough information that if you provide it to one of the other partners, they know what kind of defenses that they need to do to work against it. So we had that. The corporation is set up as a 503c3 corporate, 501c3. I'm not a lawyer, you can tell that. Which is a nonprofit. There's an annual dues fee, which is paid by the members. We structure the dues fee so that larger organizations pay a larger amount than the smaller organizations. We have a board of directors which is drawn from people who are members as well as outsiders. So we have former university president, we have people who've served in the government, we have people from regulatory, so we have a former vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston is on that. Our CIO sits on the board of directors. So that's at the policy level. And then we have a steering committee, which deals with more of the day-to-day operations, the project selection. So I sit on the steering committee, for example. And then for the various initiatives, we'll set up a project group. So an example, we have a big data initiative, which is being led by one of the universities, but we also have people from our company as well as the others. So it really is a volunteer organization, which from a governance point of view, sometimes is a challenge because you can't tell any of the other partners what to do. But on balance, because everyone has a common objective and a common goal, it really works very well.
And have you ever considered the possibility that this organization might in itself be a weak spot? Like if somebody fed you misinformation and you push that through the system, you might have everybody looking the wrong way.
Absolutely. Trust, which is what this whole organization is built on, is a very hard thing to build, and it's extremely easy to make it disappear very, very quickly. So, there are, just like anything in information security, and I hope you've heard that over and over again. You'll hear that later. None of what I've told you, or any of the speakers, or anyone comes after me, there are no guarantees here. The only thing that you as an individual and companies can do is to make sure that you're doing the best you can. And it really all comes down to a risk-based approach. And every year when I would go in and do the budget, I'd go in and I'd say, now, you could give me an unlimited amount of money. And by the way, they never gave me an unlimited amount of money. And I would not be able to guarantee you 100% security. So the important thing is, with whatever money you're given, you're spending it in the right places. And for the ACSC, we have a number of checks and balances to, so for example, if a threat information comes out from one company to another company, part of the process is that needs to be validated by a third party. Yes, so I would, you never know when your own organization and who you think is the most trusted individual in your own organization. We certainly have examples of that appearing in the newspaper over the past week, where an intelligence agency of the U.S. government who is supposed to be the most secure organization, they allowed somebody to walk out the door with one of these thumb drives that had information on it. Some of that information that the individual was entitled to, but some other of that information he was not entitled to. And what he had done is he had used the same techniques that attackers use to move laterally throughout the intelligence organization, collect a bunch of information, and put it on this device. Now, in our organization, and we're not in intelligence, we're in financial services, if I tried to do that, it would be blocked. So I don't know why it wasn't blocked in that case, and they'll never tell me. So I think I'm out of time. But thank you very much.
Thank you.